Israel will go hard. Rocky times ahead. I'm afraid so. I'm afraid you're right. I'm afraid Israel is eventually going to take the path of fanaticism. And if Israel does take the path of fanaticism and becomes more and more of a rogue state, that would strain relations with the United States, because that would mean Turkey becoming more and more frustrated with America's support for Israel, and America does not want to lose Turkey as an ally. I've said this about 50 times, and I don't want to be redundant, so I'll stop right there. I repeat myself a lot, guys, if you haven't noticed. Oh boy, Russo-German alliance would scare the living shit out of the Brits and the French. Yep, it would scare the living shit out of the Americans as well. Historically speaking, Russia has been the only country to kick the Turks' ass. Yep, that's correct. And that's another reason why the Americans don't want to lose the Turks, because the Turks are historical enemies of the Russians, and the Americans don't want to lose that big proxy against the Russians. Plus, Turkey has a pretty powerful navy now, and they have a pretty strong naval presence in the Mediterranean as well as in the Black Sea. And that's all just a giant proxy for NATO against the Russians. Buenas noches. Russia was really close to conquering Constantinople and destroy the Ottoman. Yep, I know. That's correct, but the British protected Islam, protected the Turks. Yeah, they protected the Turks. That's right. Because again, the British, listen, if you go back into history, what do you find? So you see this, geopolitically speaking, oh man. Okay, you know what? I'm going to make this screen big because we're not going to read this article right now because I got a whole bunch of stuff on my mind. Geopolitically speaking, not a whole lot has changed. Let's be real here. The Dardanelles. The Dardanelles for thousands of years have been a very, very sought-after maritime territory. Why do I say this? We can go back to the Ottoman Empire. We can go back to World War I. We can go back to the Battle of Çanakkale and how the Kiwis were slaughtered, and Winston Churchill didn't give a shit about them. We can go back to all those days, right? We can go back to all those days. But I can take you further than that. We can go back even further. Go read the Battle of Troy. Go read the Iliad. Where is Troy on a map? I'm sure some people once thought that the whole story of the Battle of Troy was a big fairy tale. It wasn't. Is there mythology in the Iliad? Absolutely, but that's how the ancients used to write. They used to mix history with mythology, and that's how they did things. So here's Troy. This isn't that far away, but here is the Dardanelles, this strait here. This is where it leads right into the Aegean Sea. The Battle of Troy, as is recounted by Homeros, I'm pretty certain used to be seen as just a big fairy tale. Then they discovered it. An archaeologist discovered the ruins of Troy. And what they found out through a lot of archaeological research is that Troy had been rebuilt several times. They actually built Troy 9 times. 9 times they built that city. Why did they build it so many times? Why did they have to keep rebuilding it? The reason for this is because Troy was sacked numerous times. That place was conquered. And the Battle of Troy that you read about in the Iliad was just one of numerous sackings of that city, which means that that city was heavily sought after. Why was it sought after? Because you're not far away from the Dardanelles. And apparently that area was a very important region for trade. Simple as that. So for thousands of years, the Dardanelles has been a sought-after place. The Russians want it. The Americans want it. Everybody wants it. Everybody wants the Dardanelles. Because from the Dardanelles, you have direct access, like I said, from the Black Sea, you go through the Bosphorus. From the Bosphorus, you go into the Sea of Marmara. From the Sea of Marmara, you go through the Dardanelles. From the Dardanelles, you're in the Aegean Sea. From the Aegean Sea, you're in the Mediterranean. Super, super important place. That area, the Dardanelles, has been sought after for thousands of years. Thousands of years. It's very interesting. You look at this history. That place is still sought after. The Russians want it. That's why, and You can go back to pre-World War I times, and you can read about how the Russians sold out on the Serbs because the Austrians wanted Bosnia, and the Russians said, well, we don't really want to do that. And then the Ottomans went to the Russians and they said, listen, if you allow the Austrians to annex Bosnia, we'll give you unlimited access into the Mediterranean. Really? Really? Russia's like, we're sold. Serbia, Serbs, I know you've been our great ally for a long time. Sorry, goodbye. And they sold out their friends. I swear, the Serbs are more pro-Russia than Russians. I'm not exaggerating. You talk to Russian people, they're like, I don't know about Moscow. I don't know. Russia sucks. Russia kind of sucks here, man. You talk to a Serb who's never been to Russia, he's like, oh, I love Russia, man. Yeah. Slavu Russia, and all this stuff. I mean, the Serbs are more pro-Russia than the Russians. And the Russians sold them out to get to the Dardanelles. So you think America is not going to sell out an ally to keep the Dardanelles? Give me a break. Give me a break. People are saying, "Oh, the Americans, they're not gonna sell out on the Jews because the Jews run America." Sure, you have Jewish people who are extremely wealthy. But at the same time, you have something called numbers. And if the majority of people are not supporting Israel, that would mean pro-Israel policy no longer being popular. Does that make sense? So yeah, you may have a lot of wealthy Jewish people, and they're going to try to influence politics and make sure America stays pro-Israel. But if people aren't going to vote for you because you're a Zionist, you're going to change your tone. Don't believe me? Look at all the woke bullshit. They were pushing that woke stuff. Wealthy people were pushing wokeism. It was getting pushed. And now you see what's happening. You got people who were working for these companies, and they're not working there anymore. You got, for example, you can look up you can find a story of some employee or some CEO who was woke and not working there anymore. Why? Because we don't want wokeism. Tractor Supply, big business here in the United States. For those of you who are not Americans, Tractor Supply sells farming supplies. It sells homesteading supplies. Basically, Tractor Supply is the main store that people who are into gardening and owning chickens go to, because at Tractor Supply you get, and also if you own horses, so you go to Tractor Supply. So they have a horse feed, chicken feed. They got, all sorts of stuff. So if you're into gardening and if you're into raising animals, raising livestock, Tractor Supply is your place. It's your place. And Tractor Supply said, "Hey, we're going to get rid of the woke stuff." I think Tractor Supply was trying to utilize some woke marketing. They said, "Nah, we're not going to do that any longer." Walmart, I think, has said the same thing. Why is that? Even though you've had some wealthy people backing wokeism, why do you see people dropping it? Because it's not popular. Do you see? So if Russia could have that access into the Mediterranean, it doesn't have to rely on Turkey giving it permission to go through the Dardanelles, because Turkey controls the Dardanelles and ultimately NATO controls the Dardanelles. So if Russia can just get that access without having to worry about Turkish restrictions, without having to worry about NATO doing any sort of hindrance to Russian access through the Dardanelles, that'll be immensely, immensely advantageous for the Russians. The Russians don't want to lose that. They want to get that. And the Americans don't want to lose that. They want to keep it. And I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe that one of the, and I don't think I'm going to, I don't think I'm wrong about this. I believe that one of the reasons why you will have a future Russo-Turkish war is over controlling the Dardanelles. That's what I believe. Because right now, Russia has direct access into the Mediterranean from Syria, but Turkey wants to control all of Syria. And NATO wants Turkey to control all of Syria to push the Russians out, because the Americans don't want Russia to have that naval base on the Tartus. So if Russia loses that naval base, then its access into the Mediterranean is going to be limited by Turkey controlling the Dardanelles. And then Russia would have to rely on Turkey giving it permission to access the Aegean Sea from the Dardanelles. Russia doesn't want to have to deal with this. Russia no longer wants this to be the case. So in the future, I believe there's going to be a war between Turkey and Russia, and one of the reasons why this war is going to start is over who's going to control the Dardanelles. And if Russia can invade Turkey and take over that country, it'll take the Dardanelles.